So we're going to carry on with persistence. Last time we showed you the NS user defaults, which was a very simple method for storing information. We're going to show you another very simple method, which is fairly different, called property list. One of the main advantages of property list versus NS user defaults is there's only one NS user defaults. So if you want to store a bunch of data, it has to be in that one file. Where with a plist, you could have as many different ones as you wanted. Now it turns out for the app we're going to do for today, we're only going to use one file for storage anyway. So to be honest, they kind of have a lot in common, except for at least this one doesn't kind of abuse NS user defaults. You know, you make your own plist. So I'd say that this one's better coding practice, and also it's got that ability to be in multiple files. The downside of property list is, you may recall this from when we made them, there's only certain things you can store in them. You can only store things like NS strings, NS arrays, NS dictionaries, NS numbers, NS data, NS dates. It's a very limited number of things you can store in there. But if the things you need to store fit that category, then you know, it's a great way to go. So persistence with plist. What we're going to do is we're going to make use of the color slider example. So last time we had you download a zip file. It had 3 projects in it. One of them was the properties, which we finished last time. There's tic-tac-toe, but the one we're going to do this time is color sliders. So go ahead and open up the color slider app. And what I want you to do is the first thing is if it says missing base SDK, click on the project, go to info, and switch the base SDK to the one you've got. Currently the newest public available at the time of this recording is 4.1, so that's the one that this was made in. Let's go ahead and start off by running it. We'll run it in the 4.1 simulator, which does support multitasking. And we're going to see how it behaves. So since multitasking is supported, if we were to change the colors, so like, you know, we were to move these color sliders around in various ways, if we were to click the home button in an app, the thing I want you to watch is watch this right here, watch the stop button. So if you hit home, you can see that the app doesn't close. The app is still running, it's just in the background. You can always see apps that are in the background by double tapping the home button, and it'll show you all of the different apps that you're running in the background. This is actually really fun to do with your phone as well. So go ahead and get your phone out if you happen to have an iPhone, and double tap on the home screen or iPod Touch and count how many apps you're currently running. I'm running 1 screen, 2 screens, 3 screens, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I'm running a lot of apps in the background. So it turns out that one of the mechanisms that you could use for persistence, now that multitasking is pretty much everywhere once 4.2 comes out for iPad, is you could just hope that the app never closes. And to be honest, for simple things, that might be okay. Just to hope the app doesn't close, and bingo, that's your method of persistence. And the one problem with that, though, is if you ever want to support older SDKs, so for example, if you wanted to support 3.2 in your app, currently that's the newest, but I'm guessing it won't be long till that's the old one. November, I think, is the current date. 2010. You can see that if 3.2, if I hit the home button, you can see the app actually closed, and then whenever I come back into it, it's back to the default, right? So one method of persistence is just to hope for multitasking to save you. But if you do choose to support an older SDK, multitasking will not save your persistence. If you would like for your app to not make use of multitasking, one of the things you can do is you can set a key in the info plist. So we know a lot more about property list now. One of the keys in there is called application does not run in background. This is the English name. There's also a way that, and if you use the version I've got, it's already been added to the info plist. So all you need to do is check the box to say do not run in background. If you wanted to see the real system, you could say show raw key values. And what it's really called is it's called UI application exits on suspend. Why might you want to do this? One reason that you might want to do this, just to mention it, is that if you want to support older versions, it's a way to guarantee that the newer ones will work just like the older ones. So that's a reason you might want to do it. Another reason you might want to do it is like I just mentioned, looking at my phone, I'm running like 30 apps in the background. To be honest, most users don't know that, but a lot of them might not like it, right? It's like I've got all these background things going. So you might choose to kill it just to, if you launch pretty quickly anyway, you might choose to kill it. I'm not saying you should. Apple wants you to load things fast. I get it. That's fine. But I don't know. Somewhere I kind of like to keep things clean. The other reason I kind of like it is it gives you a good control over when to save things. So I really like that it gives you very clear control over when to save things. You could choose to find the the application will enter background, application will enter foreground. The trouble with these though is if you want to support something older, then you don't know how it works. I keep talking about this supporting something older. This is something you should know about really. If you click on the project and you hit info, one of the first things that you should really consider when you're writing an app is what is the minimum deployment target. So how old are you going to support? Right now, late 2010, most users have at the very oldest 3.1.2. It's surprising, but there's still a fair number of people out there, even with their iPhones, that simply don't plug it into iTunes like ever. And if you never plug your phone into iTunes, you don't even know that there's an update out there. So there are actually still a lot of people running these older versions. And of course, with persistence, the big trade-off is 4.0 or later has multitasking, previous does not, and so that affects your life as a programmer a lot. So how you set this minimum deployment target affects your strategy for persistence for sure. And if it starts with the number 3, you've got to make sure you're flexible enough to consider all these different options. And so sometimes you might want to not run in the background. Once you choose to not run in the background, you can see that even the 4.1 iPhone, if you make changes and you hit the home button, you can see it actually kills the app. And when you come back in, you've lost your persistence. So let's go ahead and make it persistent with or without multitasking. So we're gonna have no multitasking just so we can see it happen better. So we're gonna choose to not use multitasking for this app. So our plan this time, we're gonna choose to save We're going to choose to save only once. We're going to save when the application terminates, and that's the only time we're going to save. You might choose to do something like this if saving takes a little while and you don't have the time to wait to do a save, like you don't have a good save point, it's happening so fast, you might just save it when it terminates, and that might be a fine place to save. There's also other functions that you could use if you look at an app delegate. You could choose to save when it will resign active, for example. That might be a better time to save. So will resign active happens if you get a text message or something like that. So you can see the reasons why you might go will resign active. That might be a really good save point. But what we're going to choose to do is we're going to choose to save things in application will terminate. You could choose to type your code right into here to save your state when the application will terminate. But we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to do what the book does, and we're going to make use of a thing called notifications, and we'll get to that. We're going to load things when the view loads, just like before, and we're going to store our data into a plist. The place where our property list is going to save to, is it's going to save into the Documents folder. So we talked about the folders last time. And one of the neat things you can do is you can go see the file system. Um, I, I still find that fun. Library, application supports, iPhone simulator. I don't know, I'll look at the 4.1 this time. Applications. I got a couple applications. One of them is called Color Slider. And then the other is called, what else have I got on here? Tic-Tac-Toe. And so where we're going to be putting our file is into this Documents directory. So I'm just going to leave this up because later, once we actually put something here, we'll be able to see that it's here. The file system on the phone, by the way, is very similar. It's got an Applications folder, the name of the app, and its generated code, and then it's got a folder system just like this: Documents, where you store permanent things; Temp, where you can store some cache data; and then Library, which has things like your NS user defaults data. So let's go ahead and get started with this thing. So this is where we want to store things. So somehow we have to be able to get to that path. And the way that you get to that path is, let's just go ahead and type it in. That sometimes can be a better way to learn things. So since you're going to need to get that path at multiple times, let's just go ahead and make a little helper function for it. I'm going to call my helper function, what do I call it here? Data file path. Really, I was just trying to remember if I put an underscore in front of it or not. I probably should have, to be more consistent. So the strategy of finding that path. So what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to find this path. Step one is we've got to find the Documents folder. Now the iPhone has a file system. It pretty much has to. And it's got a whole bunch of file hierarchies and things, but you don't really need to know any of that because you're sandboxed. You can only use those folders. The temp folder, the library is even used by the system, so you can't even use that. So really your options are: would you like to put it in Documents or would you like to put it in temp? Those are the only two folders you have direct access to. You can access other things on the system, like you can access the contacts address book. You can put pictures onto the camera roll. You can grab pictures off the camera roll. You can access the iTunes music library. But to access those things, you don't use the file system. You use the API specific to that piece of data. These are the only two where you actually access the file system directly. So step one is we're going to find the Documents folder. Step two is we're going to append on the name of the file to that folder path. So pretty simple two-step process. And then of course we're going to return the path. So step number one. So step number one is finding the Documents folder. To be honest, this will probably look pretty cryptic to you the first time you look at it. And to be honest, it still kind of looks cryptic to me. And the way it looks is there's a thing called an NS search path for directories and domains. I did not have a long background in Cocoa programming, but I guess this function's been around and people have used it for ages. But what you're searching for is you're searching for the document directory inside the domain of the NS user domain mask. I don't mind if this is cryptic. And then will you expand things if they've been shortened with a tilde? Sure, yes. So what this will do is this will look for the Documents directory. It actually returns an array, which is a little bit ridiculous because it's only going to find one thing. And so the thing that it's going to find is it's going to find the Documents folder. And so the Documents folder will be the only object in this array. So I'm just going to say object at index 0, and that will get you the Documents folder. And right now we could actually print this out, and we could say that the Documents folder path is equal to %at, and we can see where this thing's at. So if I run it, and it says it didn't hit the end of a function. That makes sense. I've got to actually call this somewhere. I'll tell you what, just for the purposes of testing, let's just call it in viewDidLoad, just so that it actually gets called. So we're gonna save stuff here, but temporarily just type in a quick little data file path, just so it calls that function. I'll run it again now. And we can see that it returned the documents folder path. It's along. So it returns where it's at on the simulator, right? And so this is actually how you can remember where this thing is at. So it's in Library, Application Support, iPhone Simulator, 4.1 Applications, whatever my crazy application number is, and then Documents. And you can see that finds this folder exactly. So it finds that whole big path. Cool, so that's great. The next thing we want to do is we want to append on the name of a file onto that path. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say file name path is equal to the documents folder string by appending path component, and then we're going to say the name of our actual file. Typically what you see people do is they make a pound define for the name of the actual file. So I called mine color slider values. So it's going to be called color slider values. I actually called it plist file name. It should have an extension plist in this case because it is a property list. I think it would probably work without it, but I'm not sure, but we should put it on there. And then when we're done, we should return the file path. And if you wanted to see that it's actually getting appended on there correctly, we could just print out the file path. And if you run it, you can see that what it did is it took the old path, which was exactly the same, and it just appended on the color slider values.plist. You can see it also included this forward slash for us, and that's what saying string by appending path component does for you, is it takes care of the forward slashes for you. So now we've got a location where we're going to store our file, which is good, which is a good thing. So we know where we're going to store it. Next thing we need to do, oh, I thought this was kind of neat. I ran it on my device, and you can see exactly what the file system looks like on the device too. Apparently it's called var/mobile, and then applications. So it's kind of neat. You can't really see much about their file system. If you look online, you can find a bunch of stuff about their file system. But this is something that you can see really quick just by running this on a device. It'll be in a different, the documents folder will be in a different place. I thought that was kind of neat. So the next thing we want to do is we want to load and save values. So let's go ahead and add ourselves a function to load and save values. So to load values, what we're going to do is we are going to get that path. So we're going to say the file path is equal to this. And then this function is kind of a handy one. File manager, default manager. What do you know? We just came across another singleton class. All of a sudden they show up all over the place. So this singleton, we say there's a function in it called file existent path, which is a handy thing. And it just says, does this file exist? Is there a file there or not? And if it exists, then we'll load it. If it does not exist, we're going to say nothing to load there. We're also going to need a save function. For now, we're just going to make the save function be blank. So we're just going to save off the slider values in the save function. Next thing we need to do is we need to figure out where we're going to call these. So one of them is fairly obvious. The load values, load slider values, that one's going to happen in viewDidLoad. So in view to load, we're going to save the slider or load the slider values. So we're going to say self load slider values. I took out the call to the path because that was just for testing purposes. And then we're going to do that just before we update the labels and stuff. And now where do we want to put the save? We could totally put the save just like we did before. Save anytime something changes. So we could put it in this slider change value, and we could save, right here. So, this is one option for a time to save. And that would work totally fine. But we're not going to do that this time. We're going to do something different. What we're going to do is we're going to save only when the app terminates. But instead of putting the code inside the app delegate, which we could do, we could just add code right here, we're going to make use of a notification. So there's a thing called an NS notification center. Lo and behold, it also is a singleton class. So the one and only notification center you can get to by saying default center. What the notification center is all about is it is kind of it's a system-wide way to listen for events. So an object can post a notification, so they post something into the notification center, and then anyone who's registered to listen for that notification will get told that that notification has been posted. So it's really just an event dispatch table. You can post notifications with your own objects, like you can write code that says post notifications. Plus there's some Apple objects that do this as well. So there are things that are built in, so there are Apple objects that post notifications. The one that we care about, and the way you listen for them is we're going to call something add observer. Usually you say add observer self, and then you say like what function you would call on yourself, which notification you're listening to, and then which object has to post it. So we're going to use this one, add observer selector name object. There are a few options here, but we don't want to go into all the details. The object that we're going to listen for is the UI application, the shared application, and there are a couple notifications that it posts. Here are the notifications that it has posted since iOS 2.0. It posts notifications when it becomes active, a whole bunch of other things about the status bar even, when it's going to resign active, which means like you've got a text message or a phone call, and if you say ignore, then it won't go to it. It'll just go to become active. But if you say, yeah, let's go see about that text message, it would terminate your app. The new ones with 4.1 is did enter background and will enter foreground. So before it goes away, or sorry, you get it after it's gone into the background and then just before it comes out. Then there's also a couple new things about protected data, which I don't know anything about them. But these are some of the new ones that's come out in 4.1. The one we're going to use is will terminate. So the way this works is, we'll go ahead and let code completion do it for us. The way this works is we're going to set up to receive these notifications. So what we want to do is we want to say NS notification center. Sometimes I forget the word center, that always bugs me. And then what was it called? Default center. We want to add an observer. There are a couple different adding of observers. We want the one that says add observer selector name object. That's the one that I like to use. So we are going to add observer self. So call this object self. When you call it, the thing that I want you to call is I want you to call the selector save slider values. If you were watching closely before, actually, well, probably everybody noticed this, slider values receive something, and it receives a notification. So it receives a pointer to a notification object. Anytime you're listening for a notification, you should always receive the notification object. The reason that you might want to do this is because they might pass along a user info dictionary. In this case, there's not a user info dictionary, so we're not going to do anything with it, but it's still good form. Anything that's a notification handler should receive the notification. The name of the notification that we're going to listen for is called UI application will terminate notification. So UI application will terminate notification. And the object that will be posting it, you should be able to set this to nil and it'll just listen for everybody, but the object that's going to be posting it is the UI application shared application. Hey, what do you know? Another singleton. They're everywhere all of a sudden. So when he posts this notification, alert the object self and call this selector. So let's go see if these things are actually happening. So if you bring up your NS log, I'll tell you what, I'm going to comment out this log message just to clean it up a little. When I load this app, you can see that it says nothing to load whenever it came in. And the reason it said nothing to load is because there's no file at that path yet. And then if I hit close, you can see that it should call to-do save slider values. If I were to run it again, it'd still say nothing to load because I didn't actually write anything to that path. But you can see that it is actually calling the close. This actually brings up another point. If you hit the stop button, I didn't think it was gonna call terminate. It used to not call terminate. So I was gonna say I don't think it'll call terminate, but it turns out it did. So the important thing that we did so far is we got these things called when the application starts up via viewDidLoad, and then we also got a way to call these when it shuts down by listening to the application will terminate notification. Next thing we need to do is actually save some data. That'd be good. So what we're going to do to save data is if we come in and we look at the saving area, is we're going to make an array. So I'm going to call mine the color values array. It's going to be a mutable array so that we can add and remove items from it. And then we're going to load items into this array. And then storing with a plist is crazy easy. An NS array is something that can be loaded into a plist. And so long as all the things in that array can also go into plist, so things that can go into plist are things like NS number, NS dictionary, NS array, NS date, NS data, things like that, then the only thing you need to do to save a file is just called take the array and call on it write to file, and then you have to pass in the file name, which is why we made that function. And then there's atomically yes or no. We could talk about what it means, but always use yes. It means it writes it to a buffer and then it does the actual writing all in one step so it can't be interrupted. You should always use yes. So the only thing we need to do here is we need to store things into the array. Now what I want to store into the array is I want to store in these 4 slider values. If we want to store something into a plist, it's got to be an object. They've got to be stored as NS numbers. So what I want to do is I want to load in those 4 NS numbers into the array. What that code looks like is we just say add object, and the object we're going to add is an NS number. And the NS number that we're going to add is we're going to create a number with a float for the red slider value, green, blue, and alpha slider values. So all we're doing here is we're just taking the float and we're putting it inside an NS number. We've seen this quite a bit, especially with the 3 Ps with employees example. We went all through NS numbers. Once we've got them all, we're going to write them to a file, which is great. Then the other thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to load them when we're ready. And actually we've got some of this code already. So loading is also very easy. So the way loading works is we first create an array. Note that this one doesn't have to be mutable because it's all set right when we get it. It's very easy. You say array alloc, and there's a function for init with contents of file. We've actually used that one before in the pickers and plist example. We used that function once before. Get rid of some of my extra lines here. And you can see that what we're doing is we are loading, we're going the other direction, right? So this way we were putting it into an NS number and putting it into the array. Here we're taking it out of the array, so we're grabbing object at index 0, 1, 2, 3. That is an NS number. To convert this NS number back into just a float, we just say float value. Again, we did this a lot in the 3Ps with employees example. Convert it back to a float and store it into the iVar. Once we've got everything in the array unpacked, we're done with the array and we can release it. And at this point, we should be able to see persistence in action. Oops. We should be able to see it crash for some reason. Apparently it's crashing because something is outside of the bounds. Interesting. Probably why this happened is I didn't follow my own advice of whenever you're dealing with persistent stuff, blow it away. Like if you make a bunch of changes for persistence, blow it away, and then launch it. So it probably thought there was a file there, but there was nothing in it. So you can see that it said nothing to load this time, which is good. So there was no file that existed this time, and there was nothing to load. But if we were to make some changes to it, we'll go with magenta again. I seem to be doing the magenta. Oops, magenta is like that. So let's just go ahead and put in some number. So I put in 1.2511. If I hit the home button, you can see it closes the app, which is good. So I'm not showing the log that time. And then whenever it comes in next time, it should load in those same values. So when you close it, I took off my log message. I was freaking myself out because it didn't say anything about logging. So you can see that it's saving the data to a property list, and then it's also loading that data from the property list. We also snuck in a few other concepts of notifications. Really, the concept of notifications is far more important than this specific notification, because you'll use notifications a lot when you're programming, and they're a good thing to know about. And then finally, I promised that we'd go back and we'd look at the documents folder, and you can see that there is now a plist file there. And if you double click on it, you can see it's got the values that we have stored. 1, something around a quarter, 1, 1. It actually did even better. It stored the exact value instead of just what we were displaying in the UI label. So you can see that storage is no great mystery, right? I mean, it's using a file system. It's putting things into the documents folder. It's giving it the name that you said to give it. And so persistence is not hard. It's a shame that it's so different than other programming languages. It feels like I don't know, it's very different than how other things work. But it's easy to use. By the way, you actually can use the C functions like the fopen and stuff like that, but it is strongly not recommended. So now you can see that there's persistence in the iPhone. And we've also should have persistence now in the iPad. So this is one nice thing about using application will terminate, is it's been supported for so long that you do it right in one place. Man, I cannot seem to make magenta on the first try anymore. Close it, open it back up, voila, we have a beautiful persistent app. Great, so we've been chugging along with this world of persistence. Hopefully you feel pretty comfortable with plist now. Really the only new thing was so easy. It was taking like an array or a dictionary and saying write to file, which was crazy easy, and then in it with contents of file, and being able to get the path. So next time what we're going to play with is we're going to play with probably the most useful example we're going to use, and that's learning how to do persistence with NS coding. So we'll see you next time for the final phase of persistence. See you then.